Hey, it's the Midnight Narrator here. Don't worry, tonight's story is low-sodium horror. Terrifying, but heart-healthy. Do me a favor, if this keeps you company tonight, tap like and subscribe so I can keep making videos at impossible hours. I didn't notice the first car. What I noticed was the quiet. Labs hum, even in the late hours. Cooling fans, refrigerated breath, the curled whisper of air through filters. That night, the usual chorus softened itself. The metronome I kept on my desk, a pocket thing my mentor gave me to pace protocols, ticked with a slow patience that made every motion feel deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. It made the fluorescence look kinder. My hands, which often betrayed me, were steady. I had stayed after the rest of the team left. Rain braided the glass, turning the city lights into long ribbons that slipped down the panes. The Mercy Jean banner hung near the security door, white letters on teal, the edges curling from too much air conditioning. I designed a trial logo myself, and I could see the mistakes now. The serif too hopeful, the clean lines a little too clean. We needed a softer font, something honest about where. I held my hand above the metronome the way I did the first night it truly steadied. Back then, the tremor clenched in my forearm like a held breath. Tonight, silence ran up my wrist like cool water. I breathed. The tiny chrome arm swept through its arc. Tap. Going home? Marcus asked from the doorway, his voice low enough not to rattle any glassware. In a minute, I said, just logging the storage temps. He came closer, bringing the smell of rain. His hair was damp, darkened at the temples, a storm given apart, and a lab badge. He leaned to look at the screen. Stable, he said, pleased. I know, I said, and I did smile, though I pretended not to. It's a strange thing when your body surprises you with cooperation. You don't trust it at first. You take the victory like a glass bead from a carnival you're not sure you should have entered. My sister Sarah texted, "Home?" Her avatar, a watercolor of a houseplant, glowed green. She lived 2 stops away in a building that smelled like toast at all hours. I wrote almost. Marcus glanced at the metronome. Still keeping time by that little relic? It was your gift, I said. My attempt at romance, he said lightly, with that careful distance we both kept. Professionals who shared coffee and sometimes held our breaths for the same result. In case you ever needed to count. Counting helps, I said. Tap. He waited a moment more, then squeezed my shoulder briefly. Good night, Elena. Night. After he left, I set the bench in order the way I always did. Racks aligned, pipettes nested, notes stacked. The rain was getting heavier. In the upper corner of the window, a rivulet trembled, made a path through its own reflection, and carried a sentence I couldn't read. I wiped it with my sleeve and found a faint line on the inside of my forearm, thin and colorless as if drawn under the skin. I rubbed it, and it didn't fade. It wasn't a scratch. It looked like a healed mark, the kind that belongs to a story you don't remember. No, that's not quite right. I felt a story flicker and then go out, like the lights that sometimes stuttered when the freezer kicked in. The mark wasn't a straight line. It curved slightly. It had a rhythm. For a second, I thought I could read it, like the ghost of handwriting. Misery? No. Silly thought. I put on my coat and shut down the bay lights. Outside, the city was washed down to essentials. The wet shine of crosswalk paint, the soft suck of tires along the avenue, the halo of a diner sign refusing to fail. I walked under my umbrella, listening to the rain's march drum the fabric above me, and tried not to think about mercy at all. On the train, I had a dream while awake. The kind you can set aside like a clinical sample and label even as your heart flutters into your throat. The car was mostly empty. An older man slept with his arms folded, his head bumping the window every time we turned. The speakers gave one soft chime for the next stop. In the reflection of the glass, I saw someone standing behind me who wasn't there. Tall, precise, a quiet smile like a knife kept in a drawer with the spoons. He lifted his hand, and I thought for an instant he would rest it on my shoulder. The train chimed again. I blinked. Just me and the glass, a woman pretending she could count her future in measured taps. At Sarah's, the hall smelled like wet wool and cinnamon. She opened the door before I could knock twice, hair up, sweats rolled at the ankle, no makeup. Her apartment grew warm simply because she was in it. "You did that thing where you text almost, and then it's half an hour," she said, mildly scolding, already taking my umbrella. "I like the rain," I said. "I know," she said softer, and set the kettle on. We ate toast at her tiny table, our elbows knocking, our thoughts slipping into old grooves. The plant on her shelf, fiddle leaf fig, alleged to be resilient, leaned toward the window like something that believed in light. We gave each other the day in thin slices, the hard parts diced small. When she reached to hand me the honey, her eyes flicked my inner arm. "What's that?" "Stray cat," I said too quickly, then smiled. "Accident at the lab, a box. You know." "It looks old," she said. "It's nothing." She didn't press. She never did. We watched a cooking show with the sound low, two strangers trying not to burn sugar. The kettle clacked when it cooled. I let my head tip to her shoulder the way I had as a child during storms. My phone buzzed with a news alert I didn't read. Sometime after midnight, the metronome in my bag ticked, even though I'd locked its arm. Tap, tap, tap. I told myself it was the memory of sound, a small ghost following me home. I slept in Sarah's spare room beneath a quilt that had picked up 100 laundromats worth of threadbare kindness. In my dream, no, not a dream, that makes it sound like a story I asked for, I stood in a park under bare branches. My hands had dirt under the nails. A poem hovered in the air, line by line, Latin I hadn't studied since college, warm as breath on glass. Misericordia, it began. I woke at 3:17 to the soft tick that wasn't there. Rain eased. Somewhere in the building, an elevator chimed. Chapter 2. The Donor List. The morning brought bright, flat light and the kind of headache that feels like a thought you can't finish. I wrote it off as poor sleep and too many crumbs of sugar left in my blood from Sarah's late-night pastry. The metronome lay exactly where I had left it on the desk, arm locked, as innocent as any tool can be. At the lab, we had a staff meeting that looked like every staff meeting. Some bruised fruit in a bowl, a screen with a title slide, chairs that encouraged obedience. Marcus stood with the calm of someone who understood every number he was about to say. "Early indicators are promising," he said. "We'll publish preliminary neurologic outcomes next quarter. Minimal adverse events." Someone raised a hand about an ethics board. Someone else asked about donors. "Anonymous," Marcus said. We all nodded at anonymity like it was a sacrament. During a coffee break, I slipped into the records room and sat at the terminal that knew my clearance better than I did. My hands hovered until they found the rhythm of the key bindings. The screen accepted me with all the enthusiasm of a bored guard. There is a particular blend of dread and curiosity that lives under the skin like heat rash. You don't see it until you scratch. I searched by trial arm, then donor pool, then compatibility matrix. Rows unfurled like train cars. Most entries were the kind of citizens who fill registries. Tragic, generous, anonymous. But scattered among the columns were codes I recognized from an internal memo I wasn't supposed to have seen. State partnerships, corrections contracts. It hadn't been a rumor. The anonymized donors included inmates. I set my thumb and forefinger on the edge of the desk and pressed until white crescents rose in the skin. My hand didn't shake. That steadiness felt like an accusation. "Hail, Victor," I read quietly, and the room felt colder. The code flanking his name marked high compatibility. He had been famous once in a way that feels like a small death for everyone. I remembered a lecture, a headline, a grainy security still. A man with a straight back and eyes that suggested he'd finished his sentences long before anyone else began theirs. I told myself it was coincidence. There were hundreds of donors. A handful would be marked like him. The trial didn't attach identities. That was the point. Still, my screen reflected my face with its intent expression, and in the reflection, my mouth looked slightly wrong, as if composing a sentence I didn't mean to say. "Working hard?" Marcus asked gently from the door. He had an uncanny talent for appearing when balance wobbled. "Always," I said, minimizing windows with a practiced stutter of the wrist. "Sarah texted me," he said. "She wants you to have lunch today." "You and my sister exchanging logistics?" "She worries about you," he said. "I am, what's the word, useful?" I wanted to roll my eyes. Instead, I nodded, because he had in fact picked up prescriptions for me before, had waited outside imaging suites, had stood quietly at the edge of my fear in ways that never made me feel observed. I hated that I needed that. I loved that he offered it without heavy ceremony. "We're clear on donors?" I asked, neutral. "Anonymous, above board, ethically reviewed," he said, not quite lying, not quite telling the truth. "We're changing everything, Elena. Change is always ugly up close." "Ugly is not the same as wrong," I said. "True," he said, and left me with a coffee I hadn't realized he'd set down. Its lid bore a Sharpie heart. He was not a subtle man. Later, in the tissue culture room, the metronome started ticking inside my head. Tap, tap, tap. I was mid-count on a wash step, and the ticks lined up perfectly with the seconds I needed. Comfortable? Familiar? Then the ticking shifted, tiny syncopations like a hand drumming on a steering wheel. I frowned at the timer. It still read a steady pace. My body was hearing something else entirely. That night, on a walk to the train, I passed the park from my dream, mud flirting with the edges of the path, bare branches, a bench with the indifferent graffiti every bench gathers. The air had that metal shiver it gets after rain. I stood by the gate and breathed, then turned away because superstition is just anxiety that's learned Latin. The news alerts I had ignored all day collected like lint. When I finally opened them, my throat went small. A body found in Riverside Square, a woman not far from the playground. The article highlighted a detail that reddened the comment section. A note on the victim's wrist in smudged ink. A single word in Latin. Misericordia. Mercy. I told myself that language belongs to everyone, that a murderer does not patent a word. On the train home, the lights flickered with the normal electrical shrug of a city built in layers. A man 2 seats down read a paperback with a finger tucked like a bookmark as he turned a page. I watched my reflection again, the one that sometimes split its smile by a fraction and brought my hand to my throat. Pale skin, one faint line I hadn't earned. Sarah called on video. Her face filled the screen with its refusal to allow despair in without washing its hands first. "I want to see you," she said. "Not your name on a location tag." "I'm okay," I said. "Tired." "Come over," she said. "I made soup. I'm 2 stops away." "Good." I promised I would, then missed my stop and had to loop back. I don't think I slept at all that night. The metronome in my head renegotiated its tempo whenever I tried. In the morning, I woke with dirt under my nails. Chapter 3, Blackout Window. I stood at the sink with a soft brush and methodically cleaned my hands. It might have been potting soil from Sarah's plant, I told myself, though we hadn't touched it. It might have been the dark chalk that rubs off old subway stations. It might have been anything other than what it looked like. "Hey," Sarah said from the doorway, voice careful as she went still. "What happened?" "Nothing," I said too fast, and her face folded the way paper does when you try to make it into a crane and it remembers it's a receipt. She walked over and took my wrist. "Let me." I let her. She held my hand like a nurse, like a sister, like someone who had learned from me how to calm others with the economy of movement. She washed away the earth or the ash or the suggestion and dried my skin with the towel our mother had embroidered with our initials long ago, crooked letters that refused to be ashamed of their stubborn slant. "I used to wake up with scrapes," she said quietly, "after climbing out the window at 16. "I remember," I said. "You told Mom it was a cat." "It was the cat," I said. We both smiled, because the cat had been 30 pounds of sentiment and fury. She held my wrist a moment longer and looked at the inside of my forearm. The faint line had companions now, 2 little arcs like quotation marks, colorless, healed. "What are those?" she asked. "Old," I said. "I think they were always there." "I'd have seen them," she said gently. "I see everything. It's my curse." "Not a bad one," I said. At the lab, my access badge hiccuped at the gate, then relented when I tilted it just so. The Mercy Jean banner had developed a ripple at the corner, as if it wanted to become a wave. Inside, the day smelled like ethanol and citrus from the cleaning crew. I was halfway through a run when my phone lit with an unsaved number. I let it go to voicemail. It lit again. I sighed and answered with my lab voice. "Dr. Voss." "There's a reporter asking questions," Marcus said without preamble, "about donors. I'd like you to avoid commenting." "I don't comment," I said. "Good," he said. "Also, administrative wants a check-in on your protocol adherence. Standard." "Of course." And he hesitated just enough. "How are you feeling?" I almost said fine, the word that patches and conceals and ultimately chafes. Instead, I said, "I woke up with dirt under my nails." He was quiet in the way of someone who hears a fracture in a tone. "Dreams again?" "Yes." "Elena," he said, "come by my office before you go home." I didn't. I took the long way out instead, through the records room I wasn't supposed to need. I did not intend to look up any more about Hale. Intentions are flimsy. The room's hum welcomed me, and then withheld judgment. That's where the blackout lives in my memory like a boarded window. 1 second, I was standing with my fingers hovering over the keyboard, rehearsing the keys I wouldn't press. The next, I was on the street outside the lab, my beaker clean coat over my arm, evening pressing at my ears like hands. My phone said I'd missed 2 calls from Marcus and 1 from an unknown number. My head felt packed with wool. The metronome ticked gently somewhere I couldn't place. I took a breath and did the rational thing. I checked my desk. It was tidy, as always. I checked terminal logs. I had not logged in after lunch. Then I checked the security camera archive the way I'd been trained. And there I was. For 7 minutes I didn't remember, moving through the hallway with a calm that felt borrowed, a patience that didn't belong to me, not hurrying, not hiding, just drifting, as if following a sound to its comfortable end. I watched myself stop at the break room refrigerator, take a bottle of water I didn't need, twist the cap slowly, as if appreciating its neck. I watched myself set the bottle back down untouched, then tuck a small item into my pocket. I zoomed in. The camera's resolution gave me a smear for my trouble. A rectangle, cardboard, a note. I felt that small heat rash of curiosity flare and then resolve into fear. There are only so many reasons to move when you're certain you've stayed still. That night, the news played on the screen above the station platform. People don't really look up from their trains for anything but weather and scandal. But a cluster had formed, and even the teenagers quieted to listen. Police are investigating a second homicide with similarities to the Hale case, the anchor was saying, voice smoothed to professionalism. A note was found on the victim, a single Latin word. I didn't wait for her to say it. I sent Sarah a message that said home soon and meant I don't know. I rode 2 stops beyond mine, then doubled back, as if distance dilutes worry. When I reached my building, the elevator chimed like gratitude. I pressed my forehead to the cool metal of the door. It smelled faintly of bleach. In the mirror inside, my eyes looked tired and bright, the way they do when adrenaline peels everything down to a bright wire. Back in my apartment, I searched myself. It's a strange phrase, search yourself, as if the mind could hold a warrant against its own rooms. I emptied pockets and bag, found the metronome, 2 pens, a lab marker, a folded paper napkin with a phone number I didn't recognize. The small rectangle from the video was not there. I went still. I let the quiet come. Tap, tap, tap. A knock at the door, 3 soft raps, polite. I opened it to find a woman in a blue windbreaker with press credentials tucked into the pocket like a confession. She had one of those faces that hold a story without yielding any of it. "Dr. Voss?" she asked. "Yes." "I'm Tamsin Lowe," she said. "Investigative. I think your trials are tied to the state's execution program." "I think you should go," I said. "I think you wake up with other people's thoughts," she said softly, and the hall filled with the kind of silence that isn't empty at all. "Good night," I said, and closed the door as gently as I could, as if loudness would invite something worse in. On the other side, her footsteps didn't recede. She waited. I waited. The metronome, mine, or the one outside, kept time. Chapter 4. The Interviewer in the Hall. She was still there when I opened the door again. Same windbreaker, same patient stance, the kind of posture people learn in hospital corridors and courtrooms. Waiting is a profession in some lives. "I'm not here to make you look bad," Tamsin said. "I'm here because 2 families called me and used the same word, mercy. They're not churchgoers. I let the chain stay latched and spoke through the gap. You should know where I live. You used to publish, she said. Your old faculty bio is archived. It's not hard to find someone who once wanted to be found. Good night. You had the infusion, she said. I can hear it in the way you pick each word up and check it for chips before you set it down. I had dinner, I said. I'm tired. I think your donors include death row inmates, she said, quieter, as if the walls could overhear and report her to the state. And I think one of those inmates was Victor Hale. I think his handwriting is turning up where it shouldn't. And I think you... Please don't take this the wrong way. Don't look like someone who sleeps through storms anymore. I almost laughed. It came out a fraction too sharp. You have a series to write. I have a person to warn, she said. There are others from your trial. They're meeting without your company's blessing. Some are missing hours. One kid carved a word into his own palm and didn't remember doing it. The metronome ticked, soundless and absolute, marking off my patience as if it were reagent. Leave a card, I said, if I need to call you. She slid one flat under the door, then, without performing offense or triumph, went away, her footsteps soft, like a nurse on night rounds. I held the card and didn't read it, and then put it in the drawer with the rubber bands and extra batteries. The apartment looked too arranged suddenly, every object placed like an alibi. I set the metronome on the counter and watched its painted arm while it went nowhere. Tap. Tap. No, not a tap. Just the memory of it. My chest learned that rhythm either way. In bed, I kept my hands open on the blanket, palms up, as if to prove they contained nothing. Sleep came the way fog does, sudden, only in retrospect. I dreamed of a corridor, industrial exact, the kind with safety rails and floor tape, a door at the end with a window the size of a small book. On the other side, a chair with restraints, the leather dark with old oil, not blood. A man sat, his expression arranged for company. He said something that flowed smooth and old and gentle, like a prayer that survives on structure alone. Misericordia, he said, and then smiled as if he taught me a word. I woke at 4:05, my mouth already making shapes I didn't want. I left the bed and went to the bathroom and pressed my lips shut with 2 fingers until my skin tingled. In the mirror, the faint lines along my forearm had multiplied, hair thin and colorless as dried milk, like a stanza beginning. I dressed and walked before dawn, the city holding its breath in the blue hour. On the corner, a newsstand blinked its fluorescent lids at a stack of papers. The headline used Hale's name again. The picture was the stock photo that lives forever. Crisp suit, straight posture, eyes like a quiet room. He'd been executed years ago. We had all watched him end. We'd believed it. At 6:30, I went to the prison. I told myself I would never do that. It turns out cells are very poorly unionized. The warden's office had the polished austerity of the more expensive kind of pen. He'd been there for decades, his face weathered into a map of decisions he didn't share. When I told him my name, he tapped a finger on the desk, then nodded once, a concession to professional curiosity. I remember your mentor, he said. Came out to speak to the ethics board 4 years back. Fine mind, convincing. Marcus, I asked, and the warden's mouth almost smiled. The CEO, he said, as if correcting a student. Different world now. I have questions about a donor, I said. About his consent? He folded his hands and looked at them. Executions are public record, Dr. Voss. Bodies go where they're meant. Paperwork is correct. Did Victor Hale sign his body over? I asked. He met my eyes for that name. Hale believed in legacy, he said. He wrote very pretty letters from his cell. You'd like them if you like clean lines and grammar that minds its manners. What did he believe would happen to him? The warden leaned back, the chair giving the quiet sigh of old leather. He told the chaplain he'd found a new church. That's how he said it. A church without God. Just a very efficient altar. He said ink and blood serve the same master if you write carefully enough. That's not an answer. Isn't it? He said, and the astringent scent of the office felt suddenly like a hospital, a place where truth is procedural. On my way out, a tall woman intercepted me in the vestibule. She wore a scarf that had been folded and refolded into the exact right triangle. Her hands were strong in the way of people who do not waste motion. You're the doctor, she said, the one with the trial. I can't talk about... I'm his survivor, she said. Hales. Something in my chest forgot its own work for one beat, and then resumed embarrassed. I'm sorry, I said, knowing sorrows are coins that spend too easily. I don't want your apology, she said. I want to tell you, he never left. I didn't talk about it because it made me sound like the kind of person you cross the street to avoid. But after the execution, for months, there was a feeling, like the moment before a word lands in the air, as if he was deciding whether to speak. What did you feel exactly? I asked, and the clinician in me took a step forward, clipboard at the ready. In my teeth, she said, a pressure, like a metronome against the bone, and I'd see things in steam on the bathroom mirror. Letters in that church language. They'd fade when I blinked. I don't care if it sounds like grief. I know what I felt. What word? I asked, though I knew. She said it without drama. Mercy. I stood very still. The vestibule's heater clicked as it cycled. The guard wrote names down without looking up. Somewhere deep in the building, a door buzzed someone worthy in. Maybe I'm wrong, she said very gently, but you look like someone who's carrying an echo. If they put him in you on purpose, you deserve the truth of it. I thanked her and said none of the things that lined up behind my teeth. Outside, the sky had brightened into the color of Xeroxed paper. I walked the perimeter fence once and then again, the chain link singing its soft, dry song in the wind. When I finally stood still, I realized I had been counting my steps. 88 to the corner, 88 back. A nice number for a pattern to choose. Chapter 5, Support Group, Unsupervised. We used to meet in a bright room with leaf print curtains and plastic chairs, the kind of space that insists on cheerfulness in case you forget. After the trial began, administration supplied a facilitator and a coffee urn so dented it looked like a veteran. We told our stories with our daytime voices and took notes like we might be quizzed on our grief later. Now the text thread said, no staff, no sign in. 7 p.m., the old yoga studio on Hemlock. I went. The studio smelled like cork and dust and eucalyptus that had given up. The still hung crooked on the back wall. There were 6 of us, spread out on mats like tired pilgrims. We arranged ourselves in a semicircle because circles invite more intimacy than we could responsibly manage. Milo sat nearest the door, hair in his eyes again, shoes off, socks mismatched. Teenager, cystic fibrosis. A laugh like a skipped stone. He lifted a hand when I entered and then looked away quickly, as if my attention were a light he couldn't stand yet. Carla, a nurse with hands that could comfort a storm, brought a tin of cookies and didn't open it. Riz, former Army medic, stared at the floor as if it owed him something. An older man whose name I always lost and then remembered, Tim, held a string of worry beads he never admitted to owning. And a new face, a woman with a scar on her jaw like a comma, pausing a sentence. "Phone's off," Riz said. "We don't need company tonight." We obeyed, each of us hearing in that click the little ceremony of privacy. For a while, no one spoke. The old building settled around us with polite cracks. Finally, Milo said, "I'm losing minutes." Carla nodded. "Hours for me." "It's like sleep without the kindness," Tim said. The new woman looked up. "I'm Cass," she said. "I'm 40, lupus. I like dogs and crossword puzzles and the sound of someone washing dishes in another room. I had the infusion 6 weeks ago, and on Sunday I woke up in the pantry with my forehead against the flour canister, and Mercy was written on the door in steam. The vent wasn't on." She exhaled. "That's my check-in." We still laughed sometimes. Not tonight. "I went to the prison," I said, when the silence stalled. "The warden said Hale believed in legacy." "That's one word for hauntin'," Riz muttered. "Not hauntin'," Tim said, thumb ticking against a bead. "A handoff?" Milo hugged his knees. "I hear songs, like someone humming, but not quite, not in any language I know." "You know enough," Carla said, and her voice used the same muscle it used to soothe post-op gurneys. "We all do. Has anyone—" The words lined up and left anyway. "Has anyone done something they can't name?" No one moved for 3 breaths. Then Riz said, "I woke up with a bruise on my upper arm, finger marks. When I lined my hand over it, it didn't fit." "Police?" Carla asked, routine always reaching for the next box. "I don't know what I'd report," he said. "Assault by the absence of myself?" Milo cleared his throat. "I took something from the bodega, a lighter, put it in my pocket left. I don't smoke. I went back and paid. I said I was sorry, and the guy said, 'For what? Happens all the time.' He wasn't wrong, but I am." "I stole a bottle of water," I said quietly, and the studio seemed to tilt to listen. I set it back down. We were kind to each other. That is true. We were also afraid of each other, and that is also true. Fear has good manners when it needs to. "Did any of you get a call?" Cass asked, tapping her phone despite the rule. "Reporter?" I said. "Yeah," she said. "She said there's money tied up in this. The state gets its tidy spreadsheets. The company gets its pages in the journals. We get us." "Do we stop?" Tim asked, and the beads paused a heartbeat too. "Stop what?" Milo asked. He was so young it made my throat feel like glass. "Breathing?" "The meds," Tim said. "The infusions." "We stop in what?" Carla said. "Let our old diseases finish their old plans." Riz ran his palms over his knees as if convincing them they were still his. "I don't want to be a choir," he said. "I don't want to be part of anybody's hymn." No one said Hale's name. We didn't have to. From somewhere in the building, a heater coughed and settled. The studio door shivered in its frame with the passing of a bus. I felt the metronome find me and set my heart to its careful pace. "We need data," I said, and heard how like my mentor that sounded. We need something we can hand to a judge or a paper. Something that keeps us from sounding like we've all convinced each other of a story. Video, Carla said. If we could watch. If we could see ourselves when we're not. Cameras, Cass agreed. I can set them. I install home security, or I did before I started losing the middle of days. We meet again, same spot, Riz said. We check in nightly by text. If someone goes quiet, we knock on their door, hard. Okay, Milo said, too quickly, because okay is a raft word. We stood to leave like a wave rising. I noticed then that Cass's jaw scar wasn't quite a scar. It was pale, yes, but smooth, a line with a deliberate curve. Do you see these? I asked, touching my own forearm. She nodded and turned her wrist. We all looked. Lines. Thin, healed, almost pretty. It felt indecent to think that. Latin? Milo asked, as if naming it might reduce it. Verse, Tim said, voice gone small. We stepped into the hallway together, and then peeled off one by one. Outside, Hemlock Street felt like a corridor from the dream. Industrial, exact. Tape across the broken sidewalk to warn of a pothole the city had poured and forgotten. I caught Milo before he left. Knock on my door if you need to, I said, even if it's 2 a.m. Okay, he said, and then looked me in the eye for the first time that night. Is it bad that sometimes I don't hate the hours I can't remember? It's like being excused from something I can't pass. It's not bad, I said. It's human. And if I do something in them, then we fix it. I said, a promise as sturdy as paper. He nodded, bought the promise, and carried it into the evening like a small, warm object. Chapter 6. The Scar That Remembers I Didn't Plan to go to Marcus. I went anyway because bodies do what they know. Take the familiar hallway, knock the old rhythm on the old door, stand with the shoulder angled just so. He opened almost at once, that practiced calm on his face, the kind that men in glass buildings mistake for kindness. Elena, he said. Good. He had set his office to evening, lamps instead of overheads, the city wet beyond the window, a decanter he'd never used because he was always on call to virtue. He gestured to the chair and then sat on the edge of his desk, choosing intimacy. Tell me, he said. I told him the antiseptic version, dirt, dreams, the survivor at the prison and her pressure in the teeth, the word that would not stop appearing. I didn't tell him about the kids' yoga studio or the way my hands had hovered over the keyboard in the records room, wanting to look up Hale's file as if the answer were a mark I could rub away. When I reached the part about the lines, these pale receding riverbeds crossing my skin, Marcus stood and came around the desk and crouched by my chair the way you do for someone you love or someone you need for a study. He touched my forearm with 2 fingertips, doctor-like. May I? I nodded, even though the permission should have felt heavier. He traced the faint curve with a caution that made my head go light. Do they hurt? No. Do you have old injuries here? No. He exhaled, then looked up at me with a sincerity I had always believed and now couldn't weigh. We can slow your dose, he said. We can adjust. We can bring you in for observation until this resolves. Resolves, I repeated, and my mouth didn't laugh at him. You knew the donor pool included the state? He didn't flinch. A fraction. Vetted, legal, ethical. Ethical is a word glass buildings love, I said. It sounds like clean hands. Don't do that, he said softly. Don't pretend you didn't want the result enough to ignore the engine. You are not a victim of this trial. You are its designer. I am also its patient, I said, and something in my voice tore a little as it passed. He looked at me carefully then, as if his gaze could thread a needle. We save people, Elena. We also collect them, I said, like pressed flowers we can add to the papers. His jaw tightened. If you think I am your enemy, tell me now so I can stop trying to be anything else. Silence is a skill. We both had some. Did Hale sign? I asked. Did he know? Not just about the body, about this, about the way he might live on. He believed in contribution, Marcus said. Some contributors are louder than others. Do you hear yourself? I asked, and immediately wanted to take the heat out of it. I'm sorry, I'm not myself. He stood. Then let me keep you safe until you are. I shook my head. I am safer with my sister, and I almost said with a room full of patients installing cameras in a yoga studio. And I'm safer when I know the truth. He walked me to the door and rested his hand on the frame as if debating the physics of blocking me in. He didn't try. He never needed to. He just said my name and made it sound like an oath. Elena? I'll check in, I said, daily, if it will help you breathe. It was not fair the way his face softened. It will, he said. In the hall, I paused by the Mercy Jean banner. The curl at the corner had deepened, almost a page turning. I reached up and smoothed it with my palm. Beneath the slick vinyl, the paint was cool. When I pulled my hand back, a print remained in condensation, faint and precise. The moisture arranged itself into 5 letters I could not pretend were random. Messer, I wiped it away with my sleeve, heart calm as glass. If you repeat any word enough, it empties itself of meaning. I could not bring myself to test that with Mercy. Back home, Sarah refused to let me stand in the doorway like a raincoat on a hook. She pulled me in, put soup in my hands, and sat cross-legged on the couch like a person who believes in cures you can cook. When I told her about the group, she said good. When I told her about the survivor, she said, I'm glad she found you. When I told her about Marcus, she said, do you want me to hate him for you? I said no, and meant I don't know. She said, then I'll hold him in the maybe box. We watched a baking show where everyone said sorry after bumping into someone else's cake. It felt like a thesis on gentleness. I could live in a country like that. Later, in the spare room, I took a photo of my forearm. The lines were clear in the flash, tender pale. I sent the picture to no one. I set my phone face down. The metronome on the dresser, arm locked, made a single, impossible tick. I fell into sleep, like stepping backward down a staircase I could walk blind. And dream was wrong again for what came. It was more like a tour. I was guided through rooms that remembered, hallways with tape lines, doors with books for windows. He was there in the way warm air is in a sealed room. Everywhere, patient, confident that you would acclimate. Not a monster in the way of torn flesh and open mouths. A scholar of patterns. A man who believed arrangements could turn into faith if you practiced them with care. Legacy, he said, though his mouth did not open. Mercy. The skin along my ribs felt tight, as if stitches had been set under it years ago and were just now tightening with the weather. I reached down, touched along the edge, and found a line I'd never known. A small curve, old and healed, shaped like the scar people get when they climb a fence badly at 10 and never mention it again. His or someone's. Mine now. I woke with my hand there, holding that proof lightly, as if too much pressure would make it vanish. I went to the kitchen for water. The window above the sink had fogged with breath from the kettle I didn't remember boiling. On the glass, dashed lines had gathered themselves, not letters yet, just rhythm, the metronome of a sentence that hadn't decided on its words. I wiped the pain with my sleeve. The lines rewrote themselves as a heat returned. The world felt very patient suddenly, as if it had all night. Chapter 7. Cameras at Rest Cass showed up to Sarah's with a canvas tote full of black domes and spools of cable, kind of kit that makes a place feel like it's preparing to remember itself. She had a gift for moving through rooms without borrowing their attention. She asked where I slept, where I cooked, where I paced when I couldn't sleep. She asked which corners collected the softest dark. "We keep it simple," she said, voice as steady as a sewing machine. "A living room angle, a kitchen angle, the hallway, your door, no mics, just eyes." Sarah hovered, the way protective people do when they're learning a new skill that will keep someone warm. "Is this legal?" she asked, then flushed. "Sorry, I'm not used to turning a home into a hospital." "It's a promise," Cass said, "that we won't lose you between rooms." We chose corners, unobtrusive. Cass taped the cords down like careful bandages and labeled each camera living, kitchen, hall, bed. Her block letters calm as a good chart. She showed me the app, the cloud I didn't want but would keep. She put a small red dot of nail polish on each lens cap. "For courage," she said, almost smiling. When she left, Sarah stood back with her hands on her hips and assessed the apartment as if it were a patient. "It looks exactly the same," she said, relieved. "Good. It will catch you gently if you fall." I made tea the way you do when you're out of strategies. The kettle clicked and a soft breath fogged the kitchen window. Before it could settle into shapes, I wiped it with a dish towel and tried to convince myself this was a reasonable thing to do. We turned the cameras on at 9:00. In my head, the metronome reached up and tucked the hour beneath its arm like a sheet of paper. "I'll be in the next room," Sarah said. "Door open, if you need me." "I always need you," I said, and watched her try not to cry at that which was beautiful and unfair. I lay on the spare bed, blankets light, phone on the nightstand face down, the little white camera eye like a star that had settled onto my wall and forgotten to be huge. I stayed very still, as if the night could be negotiated with posture alone. Sleep arrived like a train you can feel through your feet before you hear it. The corridor again, the tape lines, the book window. Except this time, the chair was empty. The restraints trailed like weeds. The room smelled faintly of bleach and nothing. "Mercy," he said, no breath, no mouth, and I thought of how children learn a word by trying it on objects to see what fits. Mercy table, mercy door, mercy hand. He was fitting the word to me, to the length of my name, to my skin. It was not affection, it was taxonomy. The cameras watched. The little red dots were brave. When the dream swerved, no, the tour, my body found its feet. I stood and walked through my own hallway. I don't remember deciding. That's the worst of it. Not the doing, but the way the doing puts on your coat and leaves humming. In the morning, Sarah and I watched the footage together with our knees touching, our tea going cold. The timestamps slid by like mile markers. At 2:14, I sat upright with my eyes open. At 2:16, I stood. At 2:18, I went to the kitchen and paused by the sink, fingers resting on the sill. At 2:19, steam gathered on the glass and smoothed itself into a line, then another, then a tiny curve. My hand didn't move. I didn't lift a finger. The letters arranged themselves like polite guests. M-I-S-E-R. I wiped the pain in the footage. That was not possible because I did not lift my arm. But the glass cleared anyway and then fogged again and wrote again. The word completed itself. Misericordia. Is there a vent? Sarah asked, practical and breaking. There is, I said, but it's off. At 2:23, I opened a cutlery drawer and laid each spoon in a row on the counter, each one handled like an instrument. At 2:27, I placed my right forearm on the cool metal of the sink and held it there like a prayer. At 2:28, I lifted it, and a pale line shone where skin met steel and memory. At 2:31, I returned to bed and lay exactly as I had been. We sat for a long time. The city did its morning outside. The bins rolled, buses sighed. Someone laughed into their phone too loudly. I could feel Sarah's pulse in the couch cushion. "Okay," she said at last. "Okay. We have information." "We have a habit," I said softly. She turned and took my face in her hands. "We have a boundary. We love a boundary. We will build walls and a moat around anything we love if we have to." I laughed, which I didn't expect to. "A little moat," I said. "A very tasteful moat," she said. I sent the clips to Cass with a note that just said, "See." I did not send them to Marcus. I did not send them to the reporter with the card in my drawer. I held the files like fresh eggs and moved very carefully. By noon, I had 3 replies. From Cass, "Got it. Keep copying. Meeting tonight." From Riz, "Door knocks if no text by 10. From Milo, "I made the vent right. Hello." JK, "But what if we can talk back?" I stared at that last line until my eyes ached. What if we can talk back? Chapter 8, Echo's answer. We set a rule. No one alone after midnight. It felt like superstition at first. Then it felt like physics. The night made a certain bargain with us between 12 and 5, and we honored it because bargains once made expect their due. That evening at the studio, Cass set her laptop on a block and cued our clips side by side, 6 little rooms becoming one honeycomb. We watched ourselves sleep and not sleep, watched our bodies turn to someone else's time, and then back. In Milo's frame, the kitchen window fogged in a rhythm like breathing. In Tim's, beads clicked off screen, a tiny percussion. In Riz's, he sat in a chair for 40 minutes without moving, the posture a soldier holds for a lost friend. Carla arrived late, eyes swollen, apology on her mouth. "I went by to check on one of my old hospice patients," she said, body lowering onto a mat like the day had been heavy to carry. "He died yesterday. Not planned, but expected." She rubbed her forearm without looking at it. "He said he hadn't been afraid. He said his wife sat with him and hummed. After." We let that sit between us like bread. When the clips ended, the studio found its old quiet. Ceiling fan clicking, pipes talking. For a long time, we just breathed in the same room. "What if we ask a question?" Milo said, unable not to be 16 even now. "Like hold up a sign or write on the fog before it writes on us." "Like a Ouija board, but with better lighting," Cass said dry. "We can be specific," I said, thinking suddenly of lab protocols, of titers and controls. "We ask something only we would know, a private answer, something that can't be scraped from a headline." "Or we ask for a name," Tim said, the beads stopping under his palm. Riz shook his head. Names make a place for a thing to sit. Don't give it furniture. We don't need its name, I said. We need our own. That hour we made a sign. It felt like crafts in grade school. Paper, marker, a straight edge. We wrote the same question in the language it liked. Quomodo vocaris? It was clumsy high school Latin. What are you called? Then we wrote another. Cuius est tempus hoc? Whose time is this? Back at my sink, I held the paper against a glass with refrigerator magnets. One a plastic lemon, one a bent paper clip that had become a sculpture. I could feel Sarah in the other room, her presence a hand on the small of my back. We slept with the cameras on and the signs in place. The moon did the slow work of looking older. Somewhere a neighbor's baby hiccuped in its sleep. At 2:12, there is a kindness in predictability. I sat up. The footage would show me smooth as a swimmer in a familiar pool. I stood. I went to the sink. The glass fogged, and for a moment the steam hung in indecision, as if it were listening to its own throat. Letters. Not M, not I. A stroke, another, a careful turn. Victor. I didn't move. The footage shows that plainly. My hands at my sides, my mouth soft. The letters completed themselves as if the window were a page. The word hung there. Victor. Not in caps. Hand-lettered by absence. My chest tightened like it had been handed an old job back. There was a half-second in the clip that only I noticed because it was mine. My shoulders squared, my spine lengthened by a fraction, my head tilted with a patience I didn't own. The posture of a lecturer taking a question. The posture of someone prepared to be obeyed because the sentences he wrote had always achieved their aims. The fog trembled, smudged, then wrote again. The hand, steadier now. Cuius est tempus hoc? Our question, rewritten by the steam, as if he were checking our grammar. The answer came underneath. Nostrum ours. I stepped closer to the screen in the morning and pushed my fingertips to the glass right over the E and the S. The pain was cool. The footage couldn't make heat. Sarah came to stand behind me and wrapped her arms around my waist like a belt. We asked, she said, voice level. It answered. We'll ask better next time. I don't want next time, I said, childish suddenly, terrible suddenly myself. That's allowed, she murmured. Wanting is allowed. I sent the clip to Cass and to the group. I did not send it to Marcus, and there was a small, mean part of me that enjoyed that. Tamsin, the reporter, texted from the number on the card I hadn't typed into my phone. We need to talk. I have docs. Your company took money from the Depth of Corrections. They tested at the prison clinic before the trial. She added, I can help you get in to see the logs. The logs. I imagined a server room somewhere under our feet, humming the way beehives hum, tidy and purposeful, full of little lives, serving a pattern. I wrote back before my better self got to me, tonight. In the afternoon, I had a tremor for the first time in weeks. It was small, almost sweet, like a reminder left in a pocket. Your body had a plan, and then you changed it. My hand steadied when I reached for the metronome. Tap, tap, tap. Then the tick missed a beat, and I nearly wept from relief that something in the world could miscount and continue. We met Tamsin at a diner with laminated menus and pie in a glass case that kept fogging and clearing, like a tiny weather system. She sat with her back to the door, trusting me to notice anyone who entered. She had a folder, of course she did. Reporters carry paper like talismans against the future. She slid me copies of emails with sanitized subject lines and unsanitized sentences. Pilot cohort cleared for intake at state facility. VR bridge protocol approved for cognitive mapping. Hale brain tissue cryo-stored post-execution. See attached chain of custody. She had a printout of a budget table with 2 columns highlighted. One mine, one theirs. I could feel my stomach trying to fold itself into a smaller shape. VR bridge? I asked. Shared dreaming, she said. Simple as salt. Language they used for the mind space. She tapped the page with a short nail. This is the part the board never saw. We read until the waitress came and refilled our coffee without asking. A kindness I had once believed proved the world's good intentions. When we finished, Tamsin watched me the way you watch someone who might faint and also might run. They built a hub, she said, a place for the transfers to anchor. The prison signed off because it sounded like research and sounded like mercy. Get the sick better. Use the condemned for good. It looks clean on paper. It looks inevitable on paper, I said, hearing Marcus in me and wanting to go home and take a shower until his voice rinsed out. Tamsin nodded, not unkind. You're in the papers too, Dr. Voss. Your name's on the trial. We're all making our little marks. Sarah reached under the table and found my knee. We'll fix it, she said. Tamsin sipped her coffee and looked at me over the rim. We'll expose it, she said. Then you can fix what remains. On the walk home, the city bent around us, letting us pass. A bus sighed. A dog pulled its owner toward a tree with an enthusiasm I wanted to draft off of. At our corner, a man practiced trumpet in his 5th-floor window. The notes fell to the sidewalk like old coins. It made me ache, really, for normal problems. Rent, time. How many lemons to buy for the week? At the apartment door, I put my key out of habit to the lock, then drew my hand back as if it had touched something warm. On the wood, faint and exact, a word had been written in a finger's invisible oil, and then dust had settled on it long enough to catch the light. Nostrum Hours. I unlocked the door and smiled without meaning to. No, I said softly, the way you talk to a cat contemplating the countertop. Mine. The word faded when the light shifted. Sometimes that's enough to change a thing. Chapter 9. The Hub. The server room lived where all such rooms live. In a building that wore glass and steel like a good suit, the lobby manned by a guard who often stood because sitting will make you sleepy on a night shift. Tamsin had a badge that was a cousin of legitimate. She had learned the names of the maintenance crew by bringing coffee, which is a password in most cities. We took the freight elevator, which made me want to laugh because, of course, we did. Everything heavy and necessary enters by the back. Inside, the air was chilled to keep machines honest. Racks stood in rows like well-behaved trees. The lights were the kind that grant no favors. The word for it was hum. You could feel it in your molars. Keep your hands to yourself, Tamsin said automatically. Don't touch what can hear you. We moved with the care of people who rarely moved illegally. She led me between the aisles, numbers rising, row 6, row 7, row 8. At the end, a door with a keypad and a card reader. She looked at me and lifted a brow. I can't help with that, I said, because it felt like an incantation. She keyed in 6 numbers, and the light went green. I did not ask how she knew them. The room beyond was smaller than I'd imagined. 1 rack, 1 desk, 1 chair. The chair was not the kind for long nights. It was a visitor chair, the kind that encourages you to get to your point and go home. On the desk, a console with a bank of monitors asleep. Tamsin woke them with a key, and the screens came alive with command lines and graphs that scrolled like old stock tickers. My body leaned forward before my mind did. Pure reflex. Code. Data. Lovely. Terrible. In the graphs, a regular pulse surfaced and flattened, the cadence of a heart that had learned to become electricity. Hale's tissue, Tamsin said quietly. Brains make waves even after they stop making thoughts. She pointed at a panel marked Archive, H50. They stored a slice. They learned to read it. Something in me tightened, but not with fear, with recognition. We had always wanted to translate bodies into durable formats. We call it a cure when it goes well. We call it a crime when the body speaks back. Can you pull logs? I asked. She opened a window and the cursor blinked, eager. The command called up a list of sessions, each with a date and a duration and a participant ID. The IDs underlined a fact I had tried very hard not to write in my head. Patients had been routed through here, their night sessions, our night sessions. The dates lined up with hours our cameras saw us sit up and go soft at the edges. Look at this, Tamsin said, fingers careful. Multi-session handoffs, cross-links. They weren't just recording, they were braiding. A breath above my shoulder, the kind you hear when someone large and polite doesn't want to startle you and fails. Don't move, Tamsin whispered, and froze with her hand hovering over a key. A man stood, framed in the door, tie loosened, security badge clipped at his belt. He looked like 100 other men I'd passed on morning trains. His gaze landed on our faces and then on the screen, and he exhaled like a radiator. I don't get paid enough for this, he said, not unkind. You need to be gone before my supervisor turns up. We need the logs, Tamsin said, voice coaxing. They matter. They always matter, he said, and rubbed his brow with the heel of his hand. Listen, I don't know what you think you're doing. I do know my name is on the closeout reports, and I'm not losing my apartment because you want to save the world. It's my body, I said, and hadn't meant to sound like that. He looked at me. He looked again. You're one of them, he said softly. Listen, I've seen things on these screens. Nights when the servers run hotter, the word pops up, in logs, in comments, people left themselves. Mercy, I don't like it. It's not my business, except at night. I hear the humming when I'm home, and I think, that's not a machine. Help us, Tamsin said. Don't be part of this when it comes out, because it will. He shifted his weight. He checked the hall. He closed the door and leaned against it, a human wedge. You get 5 minutes, he said, and you don't take anything that makes a beep when it walks away. We moved like people in a heist, quickly, careful to keep breath in the chest. Tamsin dumped logs to a drive and then emailed a set to an account with a name like a grocery list. I photographed the screen with my phone, each capture a small treason. My hands trembled. I let them. I did not reach for the metronome in my bag. I counted by breath, the way Sarah taught me when the world was generous. In 4, hold 4. Out 4, hold 4. The man at the door cleared his throat. Time. We left with our pockets as light as when we entered, which felt like a virtue. On the sidewalk, the night reopened. Air tasted like rain that had been thinking about falling and decided not to. We didn't speak for half a block. Then Tamsin said, "You need to decide who to be when this breaks." "I thought I decided that when I took the infusion," I said. "You decided what to want," she said. "Now decide what to risk." We crossed at the light. A bus hissed. The trumpet in the window was still playing, a different song, a braver one. The notes fell down and chimed on the metal of the city grate. At home, Sarah slept like someone who trusts the night to hold. I put my phone on the dresser and watched the little charge symbol bloom. On the glass, in the faintest trace of my own breath, a line formed and then, mercifully, stopped. The cameras blinked their little red dots in the dark. Courage. I lay down and spoke out loud toward the ceiling. "Not ours," I said, quiet, so as not to wake Sarah. "Mine." There was no answer. Sometimes that's the most generous thing the dark can do. Chapter 10. Unison in the Walls. Morning found me with the certainty people get before storms. Not if, but when. I texted the group, "Studio at 6, bring whatever steadies you." Milo replied with a lightning bolt, then a lemon, then sorry wrong emoji. Tim sent a prayer hands that meant habit more than theology. Cass sent tools packed. Riz, "I'll sweep the block first." Carla, "Cookies." Sarah squeezed my shoulder as if signing her name there. "I'm coming," she said. "You don't have to," I began. She cocked her head. "I don't like that sentence. I threw it out years ago." The studio's cork floor creaked. Hello. Cass had already cleared a corner and unzipped a case of small radios, earpieces we could wear without looking like a heist movie. "If we get separated," she said, "or if someone goes quiet, we have company." Tamsin arrived late, hair braided back, a face I couldn't read except for the exhaustion under her eyes. She dropped a folder on a block and looked at me. "We run tonight," she said. "I sent the first piece. By morning, there'll be calls. We can use the noise." "Run?" Sarah asked. "Into the building," Tamsin said. "Into your hub." Riz glanced at the door, then at us. "We're civilians," he said. "We do civilian things, but—" He spread his hands. "If we wait, they'll shut it down neat. They'll bleach it until it never existed." Tim's beads clicked, then stilled. "I'm tired of being a rumor." We planned the way ordinary people plan bold things, with lists in the margins and too much coffee. Cass would handle doors. Tamsin would talk. Riz would keep watch. Milo would carry nothing heavy and stay by me no matter what. Sarah's role was the one she always had: keep us from dissolving. Before we left, Carla asked us to stand in a loose circle, not hands held, no pressure, no theater, just the bodies we had, the warmth we could spare. "Say what you want to keep," she said. "My name," I said. "Mine too," Milo echoed. "My patience," Cass said. "My humor, Riz." "My apartment," Tamsin said. Deadpan. We laughed. "And my job. Fine, my courage." Tim said, "I want to keep the little rituals. Keys in the bowl, lamp on at dusk. Small things make a person." Sarah lifted her chin. "I want to keep her." She meant me. I looked down because love sometimes burns to look at. We went at 9, that hour when offices are empty except for their hum. The guard in the lobby had a sandwich and a crossword in front of him. He looked up, saw our tidy coats, our clipboards, our practiced neutrality. People are comforted by the idea that someone else has a reason to be there. He buzzed us through without asking. In the freight elevator, the door shut with the sigh of a secret keeping itself. The floor numbers climbed. Our silence settled into something almost holy, I could hear the metronome in the walls, not mine, not ours, ticking with the same stubborn optimism as always. Row 6, row 7, row 8. The door, the keypad. Cass's hands moved without ostentation. The light went green. Inside, the same cold, the same hum, the same visitor chair. The graphs scrolled their quiet fever. We didn't need to touch much. We needed proof. Tamsin slid into the chair like this was her pew and opened lines that wanted to be opened. The logs flowered. The handoffs read like sheet music. H50, then 3 IDs braided, then 6. Nights aligned with our camera times. A notation field with a single word repeated, someone's private joke or private confession. Misericordia. Riz stood by the door, body a hinge. Milo hovered at my left elbow, breath steady. Sarah rested her back against the server rack, grounding herself on steel. Cass watched a haul on a small phone display piped from a camera she'd placed. 5 minutes, Tamsin whispered, maybe 8. And then the room changed. It wasn't sound, it was the quiet. The hum lost a notch of randomness and gained a pattern. The air felt thinner, as if someone had breathed in and not yet let go. In the glass of a dark monitor, I saw a posture I recognized. Shoulders squared, head tilted, patience arranged like cutlery. Not mine. He made the room polite. "Do you hear it?" Milo whispered. "Don't name it," Riz said at once. I stepped forward, and it felt like stepping into a church where you have no business. "You use this," I said, to the consoles, to the racks, to the absence. "You wrote yourself into our hours." The graphs brightened as if pleased to be understood. On the desk, a small diagnostic metronome sat, something a tech had left as a joke or a comfort. Its arm was down, off. It ticked, tap, tap, tap. I reached out and set my finger lightly on the arm. The tick stopped. The hum held. The air waited. "No," I said quietly and lifted my finger. The metronome did not resume. In the monitor's reflection, my mouth looked like my own again. "5 minutes are up," a man said from the hall, not the same one as before. His voice wore a badge. "Open the door." Riz looked at me. I looked at Tamsin. She had 3 more keystrokes left in her. She made them. The logs sprinted to a drive that waited like a cupped hand. Cass palmed the door and pasted on her friendliest face. "Hey," she said, "we were out," the guard said, not unkind, but practiced. "This floor's closed." We went, our pockets exactly as light as they had been, our spines having learned something harder than standing up straight. In the elevator, Milo slid his hand into mine and didn't pretend not to. It steadied me in a way prescriptions never had. At street level, the city breathed like it had been holding that breath for us. Tamsin pressed the drive flat in her palm as if weighing it. "Now they call you," she said to me. "They'll be generous. They'll want to own you again." "My answer is no," I said. Her gaze was kind and unsparing. "Then expect them not to believe you the first time." Chapter 11. A gentle war, they called early. Marcus's number first, then unknowns, with charming voices. I let them ring. Sarah cooked eggs and hummed something that might have been a lullaby and might have been a protest song. She kissed the top of my head when I bent over my tea. When I finally answered Marcus, I did it on speaker with Sarah sitting cross-legged in the doorway. He sounded like a man who had rehearsed moving through a burning building without starting a fire anywhere new. "Elena," he said, relieved, and then, as if he knew he shouldn't be, "I've been trying to reach you." "You have," I said. "There are misunderstandings," he said. Things are being presented without context. We'll release a statement. You used a prison as an intake site, I said. You used tissue to build a bridge. You let a man walk through it. He was silent, just long enough to choose the honest word and reject it. We recorded residual neural patterns, he said. We learned from them. The benefits are extraordinary. And the costs belong to whose skin? I asked softly. He didn't answer. Not that. Come in, he said instead. We can monitor you. We can keep you safe. I'm safer out here, I said, with windows and ordinary light. Elena, he said, and the ache under my name was real, which made it worse. Don't do this to the work. I'm not, I said. The work is doing this to itself. I ended the call before I could become reasonable. Reasonable is often where bad things go to bathe and come out clean. By noon, the first article ran, Tamsin's byline, phrases that landed without melodrama, state partnership, covert pilot, shared dream interface, mercy program. That last phrase unknotted something in me. The world will always try to rename harm after a virtue. Our group thread flared and then sobered. Cass, lock your doors. Riz, expect visitors. Carla, I'm at the hospital till 8. Come sit with me if you need a crowd. Milo, Mom says we'll sue the state. I told her that sounds like a field trip. Tim sent a picture of his beads on a windowsill, sunlight making little planets out of each one. I'm tired, he typed, but not alone. That afternoon, the lines on my skin darkened as if someone had decided pencil wasn't enough and reached for pen. They glowed pale, careful. I wore long sleeves because the world was already getting too much of me. At dusk, I injected the suppressant we kept as a contingency. It dulled me like a fog at ground level. I felt far away from my own mouth, which made speech mercifully simple. I don't want to be a choir, I told Sarah. You're not, she said, and tucked a throw blanket around my knees, though it was not cold. You're a soloist who sometimes lends her voice. We turned on the cameras. We laid out the signs. We asked questions not with Latin now, but with our faces. Whose time? Whose hands? Who are you without a wrist to carry you? At 1:58, earlier than usual, I felt the thinness arrive. It is like the moment before a faint, not darkness, but surrender. I sat up. The footage would show me glance toward the hallway as if listening to footsteps on carpet. I stood and walked to the kitchen, the glass fogged. Letters tried to pain and stumbled. VI, then a dash, then a pause. The hand, the heat, learned my rhythm. Then another line formed beneath, Meum, mine. I did not know whether that was his boast or my reply written by accident. The fog trembled as if unsure of its own grammar. I lifted my left hand slowly, willing it to belong to me. I placed my palm flat on the window over the letters and felt the glass admit the heat of my skin. No, I whispered. Ours is not consent. The letters blurred. The top line, the V trying to become a victor, dripped away like rain under heat. The second line held. Meum. I withdrew my hand and went back to bed and lay on my side and did not dream or tour or kneel in any room. The suppressant hummed its gentle lie. In the morning, my forearm bore a new mark. Not a line this time. A small circle, almost pretty, like the end of a sentence that had finally found a period. It sat just above the wrist bone. A pale moon. When I pressed it, there was no pain. Sarah touched it with the pad of her finger and sighed. You're writing back, she said. Or he is, I said. Either way, she said softly. "You're not silent." Chapter 12. The Mind's Room. The calls kept coming. Officials included words like partnership and innovation. A tidy woman from the board left a voicemail that wanted me to remember collegiality. Someone in a suit on television said this was fear of progress. Tamsin kept publishing, each paragraph like a breath you take before stepping into cold water. The comment sections did what they always do, and we did not read them. By evening, the building on row 8 had guards at the desk who wanted last names and less charm. We didn't go there. We went inward. At the studio, Cass had hung blackout cloth across the mirrors. "I don't want this to be about reflections," she said. "I want it to be about us." We pushed our mats closer. The room felt almost warm, almost like exercise, almost like a church. A candle flickered and made our faces look like versions of ourselves we might forgive. "What if we go to him?" Milo said, and then blushed because he hated the him. "I mean, what if the shared room goes both ways?" "It does," I said, remembering the graph's calm, the handoffs that looked like a braid. "It's a bridge, not a hook." Riz cracked his knuckles softly. "I don't want to give him anything else to wear." "Then we don't," Carla said. "We take it off the rack." We sat with our backs against the wall and let our breathing find one rhythm, because that's what rooms ask for. I placed the metronome on the floor between us. Its arm hung straight, off. I did not touch it. Tap, tap, tap. It started anyway, the way rivers find the ocean even when we dam them a dozen different ways. "Say your name," Cass said, eyes closed. "Not out loud, just say it where it counts." I said mine, and, in the corner of my mind, watched someone else listen. The room on the other side of the bridge appeared. Book window, empty chair, walls that believe in cleanliness as a creed. I stood at the threshold, not a guest this time, not a penitent. A woman, under her own weather. He was there the way a smell is there, close, insinuating, impossible to point at. In the glass, a second reflection tilted his head to consider me. If I tried, I could have made him handsome. If I tried, I could have made him nothing. I did neither. "You don't belong here," I said. "Misericordia," the air wrote, indulgent, as if correcting a child's grammar. "You keep using that," I said. "We don't agree on what it means." The chair behind me scraped gently on my side of the bridge. In the studio, I must have shifted. In the mind room, the sound was a door opening in a polite house. I took one step forward. My forearm warmed where the pale lines lay. I did not look at them. "You wrote Nostra?" "Ours," I said. Then I wrote Meum, mine. "You can read. Read this." I set my hand flat on the glass of the book window. The cold came through with a precision that made my teeth ache. Behind the glass, the reflection mimed the motion, his hand and mine, a palindrome. I bent my fingers until my fingertips tapped out a rhythm on the pane. 4 taps, pause, 4 taps, pause, the cadence Sarah had taught me. Breathing written as code. On my side of the world, I felt Sarah's palm between my shoulders. On the studio floor, the metronome missed a beat and then caught itself. In the mind room, the tap's echo stumbled. He learned the rhythm and failed to make it pretty. He tried again. 4, slight delay, 3, then a single insistent thud. "You don't breathe," I said. "You don't get to set the tempo." I drew a circle on the glass, the small moon that had marked my wrist. I pressed until the cold bit. The circle fogged under my hand, then cleared. His hand tried to mirror and made a smear. It looked for a second like a thumbprint, Familiar, ugly, human. Legacy, he announced to the air, and for the first time, the word sounded small. Behind me, voices braided, the group's breaths, a small cough, Milo's restless shift, Carla's low hum. The room on my side held me up. I stepped back from the glass. If you want mercy, I said, then stop. The air wrote nothing. I don't know whether what happened next was sabotage or prayer. We had positioned ourselves to anchor each other. We had turned off every reflective surface we could find. We had named ourselves like people in a lighthouse, miscounting seconds until dawn. In the mind room, something leaned. The pane of the book window showed a fine crack from corner to center, a spider's first idea. On the studio floor, the metronome's arm swung once more, and then, as if instructed, lay still. Tap, tap, silence. I opened my eyes. The blackout cloth moved a little with the building's breath. Cass wiped her cheek with the heel of her hand and pretended not to. Milo stared at the ceiling as if numbers were written there and could be counted to safety. Riz rolled his shoulders like a man after a long march. Carla smiled at no one. Tim slid his beads back into his pocket like a secret he was ready to keep again. Sarah reached for me. "You with me?" she asked. "Yes," I said, and for the first time all week I didn't add a condition. We sat in the room until the candle bent low and then straightened because flame believes in itself. When we left, the street gave us an ordinary night's noises, laughter down the block, a bus break, a couple arguing gently about whether to take the long way home. Back at the apartment, the kitchen window fogged only with our tea. It wrote nothing. The little circle at my wrist shone pale and unafraid. Chapter 13. The letters fade. By morning, the window was only a window. Steam rose, turned to water, slipped down without arranging itself into anything but gravity. The quiet carried no message except the one Sarah spread with butter and jam. Eat, breathe, go gently. I could live inside those verbs. The article multiplied. Tamsin's piece grew spokes, analysis, op-eds, a brisk correction from a spokesperson who called us anomalous outcomes, and then apologized for the phrasing. The board announced an immediate internal review, which is the sort of sentence that throws a blanket over a chair and calls the room clean. We met in the studio because routine is a rope you can pull yourself along. Cass brought a roll of painter's tape and made a small grid on the floor, not for choreography, just for comfort, lines you can step over on purpose. Milo came in flushed from sprinting the block twice to make his heart listen. Riz checked the stairwell, the roof, the alley, like a man padding pockets for keys. Carla plugged in a kettle that clicked to life like a friendly animal. Tim set his beads on the sill again and did not touch them. "I dream nothing," Milo announced, half proud, half bereft. "Me too," I said. "Nothing can be a gift." Cass unrolled a printed email at arm's length. "They sent me a termination notice," she said, almost conversational. "Contractor status revoked, effective immediately." "You okay?" Carla asked. "I have tools," Cass said, "and these hands." She lifted them strong and capable. "I'll be fine." "Press wants a face," Tamsin texted, arriving with wind in her hair. "You don't owe them your face." "I'll give them mine," I said. Sarah looked at me sideways. "Boundaries," she murmured. "I know," I said. "I'll speak. I won't perform." At noon, I stood on the courthouse steps with a scarf Sarah had knitted the winter our mother's cough taught us how to listen. Cameras blinked. The air smelled like wet stone and hot pretzels. Tamsin stood to my left, close enough to catch me if a question tried to shove. I told him about nights with the sound off. I told him about the lines that weren't scars until they were. I told him about a room that believed in restraint. "We are not vessels," I said, voice even. "We are people with clocks of our own." Someone shouted a question about hail. Someone asked whether I felt unsafe. I said yes to one, yes to the other. Then I went home and folded my coat over the back of a chair the way you do when you intend to wear it again soon. That evening, the fog on my kitchen window made a brief attempt at a letter, the beginning of an M, but the line lost courage, sagged into a curve, and turned into an ordinary drip. I watched it descend. It left no word behind. I slept like someone who had finished a test and, if not passed, at least turned in all the pages with her name on them. Chapter 14. What the Body Remembers. In the morning, a headache found me, the simple human kind that comes when you've cried just enough and not quite. Enough water has replaced what left. I took the cheap pills, drank the cheap coffee, and felt no less for the economy of it. A tremor visited my right hand, and I let it. "Hello again. We've both been busy." Sarah saw it, of course. Her eyes softened, but not with pity. "You'll tell me what you want," she said. "To push, to stop, to drift. I can do all three." "I want toast," I said, and laughed because that felt like a declaration of philosophy. At the studio, we had to set out more mats. The people we didn't know came, faces from the trial who had read our thread like a lighthouse log. A woman whose scarf still smelled faintly of hospital laundry, a man with a scar that traced his hairline like a soft crown. They sat and breathed and waited for a pattern they could belong to without losing their names. "We don't promise cures," Riz said, gruff and kind. "We promise company." We practiced the 4 count with our eyes open. We took turns lying back while someone we trusted watched the door. We let the metronome sit in the center and not run the room. When it twitched, we smiled at it like you smile at a cat who jumps on the table because the sun lives there. Afterward, I walked with Milo around the block. He kicked gravel the way teenagers turn rocks into punctuation. "I keep thinking," he said, "what if the parts I liked, the steady lungs, the easy flight of a flight of stairs, what if those were built on something I can't keep?" "Then we'll build something else," I said. "With stairs, you can stand to climb." "Feels unfair," he muttered. "Fairness comes in weird shapes," I said. "Sometimes it looks like a stupid little lemon emoji." He grinned at that, a flash of 16 that made a car horn down the block sound like music. In the evening, my forearm itched. I scratched carefully, the way you're not supposed to, the way people do anyway. A fine flake lifted and drifted away like dandruff or ash. Underneath, the faint line, pale as old paper, remained. I could not make myself decide whether I was erasing him or revealing me. Marcus texted twice and then, "Old school," called the landline we rarely use because we are not a landline kind of century. Sarah picked up first and said, "You're in the maybe box," then handed the receiver to me. "I resigned," he said without preamble, effective at the close of inquiry. I leaned against a counter, pressed my palm flat where a word might have wanted to appear and did not. "I didn't expect that." "Neither did I," he said. "The board asked me to present a plan that sounded compassionate. I couldn't shape one honest enough to keep my job." "I'm glad," I said, and then I wasn't generous enough to leave it there. I'm also angry you didn't reach that honesty sooner." "Anger accepted," he said, and I heard the tired smile, the man who could hold two truths without dropping either. "There's something else." "Of course there is," I said softly. "They've sealed the room," he said. "They've scheduled a controlled shutdown. But there's a redundancy, a failover node. If they light that up during the audit, the system can keep a heartbeat without the primary." "Where?" I said, because the part of me that designs protocols does not like loose ends. He told me. A smaller building with no lobby guards to charm. A room with a keypad whose code was someone's child's birthday. A chair that would not mind one more visitor. "Don't go," he added, which made me say, "I will," out of sheer human cussedness. When the line clicked quiet, Sarah leaned her hip into mine. "We go," she said, "but gently. We don't owe anyone heroics." "I may never give anyone heroics," I said, "but I can give them a quiet decision." Chapter 15. The Mercy Hearing. We didn't go that night. We went to a different kind of room instead, a hearing with microphones that made everyone sound like their throat had been ironed. We sat in the back because the back lets you leave without bruising elbows. A panel of officials faced a panel of citizens. The words ranged from careful to cutting. A pastor spoke about forgiveness. A victim's brother spoke about sentences and how long they should stay put. A scientist with clipped vowels said the word bioethics like she still believed it had a firm outline. A man in a suit said innovation and meant stock price. Tamsin took notes like she was snapping taut threads. They called on me when the room needed a different temperature. "I'm not here to end anyone's work," I said. "I'm here to end one mistake. We didn't just harvest tissue, we harvested the patterns that make a person. We taught the world to let that pattern keep walking." "You're describing consciousness," a councilwoman said, skeptical but not hostile. "You're certain?" "I'm describing presence," I said. "If you have never felt someone stand behind you when no one is there, good. Keep that luck. But I am not going to debate grammar with a ghost." A ripple of laughter gentled the room without making it unserious. "What do you want?" a man asked. "Beyond an apology?" "A shutdown," I said, "and a promise you'll never federate this system to any other. Don't turn it into a product that travels." A woman from the corrections department raised a hand, palm up, a gesture that said, "Let me try." "We thought," she said, "we could rehabilitate or redeem." "You do understand the pressure to make something tolerable out of something hard." "I do," I said. "I also understand that mercy without consent is just another word for ambition." We left before the press scrum could form teeth. On the steps, the air had the soft chill of early winter rehearsing. Sarah buttoned my coat up to the collar like I was 5 and dared anyone to laugh at the gesture. No one did. That night, the window wrote nothing. The metronome slept. I dreamed of a kitchen with no chairs because standing can sometimes be kinder to a spine. A small gift of a dream, easily shelved. Chapter 16. The Quiet Saboteurs. We went to the node at dawn because buildings don't wake all the way up until 9, and the guards who draw the 7 a.m. shift have not caffeinated their suspicions. The address was dull. A squat brick block tucked between a locksmith and a store that sold ribbons by the yard. The kind of place you forget twice. Cass came in a pale coat that didn't look like a coat a person uses to do crime, which was her point. Riz wore neutral. He is a man who can be mistaken for any other man until he wants not to be. Milo stayed home because his mother folded her arms, and love is a kind of gate code. He texted us every 5 minutes, a little lemon, a little lightning. Tim sat in the studio to be our voice if our radios went petulant. Carla worked a shift and sent cookies anyway. Inside, the air was the same air as all such rooms. Dry, practical, humming, the hymn machines sing to themselves. One rack, one desk, one chair. The keyboard waited like a piano we could not play. A small diagnostic metronome sat, turned to off, and still managed a faint, insolent tick. Power, Cass murmured, both a question and an answer. She traced the cable runs, eyes half-lidded like a cat in sun. "There's a kill here," she said, tapping a box with polite knuckles. "But it'll send an error upstream. A technician will come light a candle you won't see." "We don't want candles," I said. "No," she agreed. "We want plain darkness." Riz stood by the door with his hand on the bar and counted heartbeats like a clock you wear inside. Sarah watched the hallway with a calm that made me remember her at 12 with a slingshot she never fired. We didn't smash. We didn't cut. We unplugged what would send no alarms. A whisper of fiber here, a redundant power feed there, the tiny internal time source that taught the box what day it was. We let the console think it was still morning while a world outside walked home for dinner. The graphs sagged. Lines that had learned to stand at attention wavered. A pulse that had been taught to insist on itself lost the beat. "Careful," Sarah said, and when I looked at her the way you look at a doctor who has set a hand on a fever, she nodded toward the desk. My hand hovered over the metronome without touching it. Tap, tap. Then it hesitated, as if waiting for me to decide something it had no right to. "No," I said, not angry, "just a boundary you could put your palm against." "You go quiet now." The arm settled. Silence has a sound, the faint stretch of your own skin, your breath being honest about its speed. The building remembering it has pigeons on the roof. The door handle rattled, a janitor trying a key meant for another. Lock. Riz smiled at me like we were in line at a movie. Cass put the panel's faceplate back on with screws she would have won a race with. Sarah straightened my collar, because love is a reflex. We left in a stream that looked like we had paused on a walk to admire invoices pinned to a corkboard. On the sidewalk, a bus went by with a white poster pasted to its side. Mercy, a new kind of care. I did not bless the coincidence. I did not curse it. I watched the ad disappear and felt lighter without having lost anything I meant to keep. That night, my body remembered its old speeches. The tremor came and went. The fatigue found me and stayed for tea. I lay down and woke once, twice, with ordinary thirst. The window fogged and dried. The circle at my wrist looked like a dot at the end of a sentence you write when you've decided not to say more. I said quietly into the dark, "I will not be your verse." The room didn't answer, which was mercy of a humble kind. Epilogue. After the timer stops, weeks folded themselves into honest piles. The board's inquiry concluded with phrases like unacceptable deviation and programmatic halt. Marcus kept his resignation, then disappeared into a small research lab that will, I believe, award him obscurity and possibly peace. The company reprinted the banners without the serif I once chose and hung them for a different study that involved a different organ and, I hope, no ghosts. The group held. Not everyone kept coming. Some people are better served by mornings than meetings. Milo sent a photograph of a hill he climbed without stopping. Under it, he wrote, "Still mine." Cass started a small shop that installed cameras only where consent could sign its name. Riz started sleeping with the radio off. Carla kept bringing cookies to shifts where Death sat politely in chairs and asked for water. Tim left his beads on a hook by the door and touched them on the way out, exactly once per day. We love our little rituals. They help us feel like ourselves when we stand in our own doorways. Tamsin won an award she didn't go to accept. She was in a diner with someone's aunt who wanted to tell the whole story again from the start. She texted me a picture of pie and coffee and wrote, "Mercy is smaller than they think and bigger too." I wrote back, "Yes, Sarah learned to nap on a train without flinching. She held my hand at appointments and waited with me on good days and bad ones and the many that were neither. When my symptoms returned, they returned in the voice I already knew, imperfect, unfinished, admirable in their consistency. I made a room for them and asked them to mind their manners. They did, more or less. We ate toast and called it a meal. We looked at a plant and called it a plan. We measured a day by how kindly we spoke to ourselves when we didn't get everything right. The metronome stayed on my dresser with its arm down. Sometimes guests would pick it up and flick it, amused. It would tick, obediently, until I reached over and set a finger on it, and then the room would return to itself, as rooms do when you ask nicely. Once, in the cool part of a long night, I stood at the kitchen sink and let the kettle's soft ghost fog the glass. A line tried to draw itself and thought better of it. In the faint condensation, a near letter curved, an M that could have been anything. My hand rose on its own to wipe it away. I stopped. I let it fade without my help. That felt important. On a different morning, a week after leaves began to clog the gutters and make small lakes that cars love to ruin, I caught my reflection in the window, just a sliver, and noticed my posture, not quite squared, not quite bowed. Mine. It felt like forgiveness does when it's real, quiet, useful, slow. I don't know whether he's gone. I don't claim that kind of certainty. Some days, when an elevator chimes at a strange hour or a radio catches a station no one tuned, I think I hear a rhythm trying to wear my name. When that happens, I lay my hand flat on any cool surface, a table, a window, the top of a washing machine, and I tap 4. Hold 4. Hold. I breathe. Then I go make a sandwich or return a call or text a friend a stupid lemon and wait until laughter shows up like a delivery we didn't order and wanted anyway. I ask very little of the universe now. A steady kettle, a door that sticks only when the weather changes, a sister who knows when to knock, a city that lets me walk it at night and says gently, "Watch your step." I ask to keep the words that are mine and to let the ones that aren't turn to steam and run back into the air. Hey, if you listened this far, if you stayed with me while the letters tried to be sentences and then learned better, thank you. I'm the Midnight Narrator, and your one sock bravery matters. If you want more soft hauntings and careful endings, tap like and subscribe. It lets me keep the lamps low and the stories warm. Sleep now. Let the timer stop. If something taps at the glass, don't be afraid. You know your name. That's enough.